It began on a quiet afternoon in late autumn. The kind where the air feels softer than usual and even the wind seems to move slower. In a small suburban neighborhood, a little girl named Lily wandered along the sidewalk, dragging a stick through the fallen leaves. Her backpack hung loosely from one shoulder, and her shoes scuffed against the pavement with every small, tired step. The world around her was perfectly ordinary houses lined up in neat rows, trimmed lawns, and the faint hum of distant traffic butts inside Lily's chest. There was a heaviness that didn't belong to a child her age. Her family had moved to this town just 3 weeks earlier, and she hadn't yet found the courage to talk to anyone at school. Every morning, she sat alone on the bus, watching other children share snacks and laughter that seemed to exist in a world she couldn't touch. As she walked that day, she wasn't really going anywhere. The sky was overcast, and the late light had a silver hue that made everything feel still, like a painting. She paused near the end of the street when she heard a faint sound, almost like a cry. It wasn't human, but small and sharp, echoing from behind a line of garbage bins near the corner. For a moment, she stood frozen, unsure if she'd imagined it. Then it came again, a soft whimper, weak and frightened. She crouched down and peered between the bins, and that's when she saw him. A tiny puppy, shivering, its fur matted with dirt and rain. It had eyes too big for its head and a trembling body that looked fragile enough to break. With one wrong touch, something shifted in Lily the instant she saw it. The loneliness that had clung to her for weeks suddenly turned into something else, a quiet urgency, an instinct to protect. She took off her jacket and laid it on the ground, coaxing the puppy closer with gentle movements. It hesitated at first, but then crawled forward, collapsing into the fabric as if it had finally found safety. Lily lifted it carefully into her arms, feeling the faint rhythm of its heartbeat against her chest. She didn't know where it came from or how long it had been there, but she knew, without a single thought, that she couldn't just leave it at home. SHE hid the puppy in a box lined with an old towel in the corner of her room. Her parents were often too busy to notice much, her father working late hours, her mother managing endless chores and emails. Lily fed the puppy small bits of bread and milk, whispering to it in the silence, even though she never used words aloud. She named him Benny after a stuffed dog she used to have when she was younger. Each morning before school, she checked on him, tucking him in with care, as though he could understand every small act of kindness. Days passed, and Benny began to change. The dirt washed away, revealing a soft golden coat that caught the light in delicate strands. His tail started to wag whenever Lily entered the room, his eyes brightening with recognition. For the first time since moving, she smiled every morning. The emptiness she'd felt, the strange ache of being unseen, began to fade. Her parents noticed her lighter steps and brighter eyes, though they didn't know the reason. To them, it seemed like she was finally adjusting. They didn't ask questions, and Lily didn't offer answers. But secrets, no matter how small, have a way of creating their own weight. As Benny grew, it became harder to keep him hidden. His tiny yips turned into louder barks, and his curiosity led him to explore beyond the box. One afternoon, while Lily was at school, her mother entered the room with a basket of laundry. She froze when she heard the soft thump of paws behind the door. When Lily returned that day, her mother was waiting in the kitchen with folded arms and a look that wasn't angry but tired. The conversation that followed wasn't lauded. Didn't need to be. The truth was out. Benny couldn't stay. That night, Lily sat beside the puppy, her hands gripping the edge of the box, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Benny pressed his head against her arm, sensing the sadness he couldn't understand. She knew her mother was right, they couldn't keep him. They didn't even know where he came from. But she also knew something her parents didn't. The puppy had given her something she couldn't explain, a reason to wake up, a small piece of joy that made her feel whole again. Losing him would mean returning to that quiet emptiness she had just begun to escape. Morning came too soon. Her father called the local shelter, and they agreed to take the puppy that afternoon. Lily sat by the window with Benny in her lap, watching the minutes slip away. When the car pulled into the driveway, she whispered a small promise to him, not in words, but in the quiet way her arms held him tighter. She carried him to the door, his fur warm against her chest, and handed him to the volunteer. For a moment, the puppy looked back at her, and in his small, trembling body, there was something that felt like understanding. The car door closed, and the sound of the engine faded down the street. The house felt emptier than ever. That evening, she went to bed without dinner, her pillow damp with tears. Her mother peeked in once, then left her alone, thinking time would make her forget. But children rarely forget the things that touch them deeply. The next morning, Lily woke early, driven by something she couldn't name. She slipped on her jacket and sneakers and began walking toward the shelter. It was nearly 2 miles away, and the cold air bit at her skin, but she didn't care. She needed to see him, even just once more. When she arrived, she stood outside the gate, staring at the rows of kennels through the wire fence. There were dozens of dogs, barking and pacing, but none of them were Benny. A woman at the counter told her that a family had visited the day before and adopted him. He was gone. Lily stood there in silence, her throat tightening as if the world had closed around her. She turned back toward home, her small figure moving down the empty street, the wind tugging at her hair. That night, she couldn't sleep. The moonlight spilled through the window, catching the corners of her empty room. She thought of Benny somewhere out there in another home, maybe curled up beside someone else's bed. It hurt, but somewhere inside that pain was also something else: gratitude. Because even though he was gone, he had changed something inside her forever. The next morning, she did something her parents didn't expect. She went outside, walked to the neighbor's yard, and began talking to the little boy who often played there alone. It was awkward at first, but she smiled anyway, and he smiled back. For the first time since moving, she felt like she belonged somewhere again. What Lily didn't know, not yet, was that this wasn't the end of Benny's story or hers. Sometimes, the things we lose have a way of finding their way back to us, just in a form we don't see coming. And for Lily, that truth was waiting quietly, only a few days away. Days passed, and though Lily tried to fill her time with school and the few friends she had begun to make, a quiet part of her still reached for the sound of paws on her floor, or the soft weight of a tiny body resting in her lap. Every now and then she would glance toward the empty box in the corner of her room. The towel still folded neatly inside, untouched since the day Benny left. Her mother had suggested she throw it out, but Lily couldn't. She said she was saving it for something else, though she didn't know what that meant. In truth, she simply couldn't let go of the last trace of him. Winter arrived slowly, frosting the windows with delicate white veins and filling the mornings with breath you could see. The first snow fell one Sunday afternoon, turning the neighborhood into a landscape of soft, white silence. Children ran outside to play, building uneven snowmen and leaving trails of laughter behind. Lily watched from her bedroom window, tracing circles on the glass. For the first time, she wasn't completely alone. The boy from next door, his name was Noah, had started walking with her to the bus stop each morning. He didn't talk much, but he shared his mittens when she forgot hers. And sometimes that small kindness felt like enough still. The memory of Benny lived quietly in everything. When she passed the park, she thought of the way his tail had wagged when the wind touched his fur. When she saw another dog on the street, she caught herself hoping it might be him. It never was, of course, but the heart often refuses to accept the logic the world insists on. Then, one late afternoon after school, something unexpected happened. Lily was walking home alone through the side path that led behind the small grocery store, a shortcut she often took when it was too cold to linger. The snow was half melted, leaving patches of ice and puddles of grey slush. As she turned the corner, she heard a familiar sound, a bark, quick and bright, echoing against the concrete walls. She froze. It couldn't be. It was too much like memory playing tricks. But then she heard it again, followed by the rapid click of paws on the pavement. She turned, and there he was. Benny. He looked different, healthier, bigger, his golden fur clean and shining even under the dull sky. A red collar circled his neck, the kind with a tiny silver tag that reflected the light. But his eyes, those same wide, kind eyes, recognized her instantly. He bounded toward her, tail wagging so fast it blurred into a golden streak. She dropped to her knees as he reached her, and for a moment the world around them disappeared. His paws pressed against her coat, his nose buried against her cheek, as though he'd been searching for her all this time. She held him tight, feeling the warmth of his body melt through her cold fingers. Then she noticed the man walking toward them from the other side of the street. He was older, his face weathered but kind, wearing a thick coat and gloves. When he called the dog's name, Benny hesitated, glancing back and forth between Lily and the man. It was clear now, Benny belonged to him. Her heart sank, but she also understood. The man explained that he had adopted the puppy from the shelter weeks ago after losing his wife. The dog, he said, had brought light back into a house that had been silent for too long. Lily listened quietly, her hand resting on Benny's head. She could see how much the dog loved the man, the way he looked up at him, the way he stayed close even as he leaned against her. The man smiled when she told him how she had found the puppy months ago and cared for him in secret. His eyes softened, and for a moment they both stood there in the cold, connected by something unspoken. Before he left, he asked if she'd like to visit Benny sometime. Lily nodded, though part of her heart ached at the thought of watching him walk away again. That night, she sat by her window, watching snow fall under the streetlight. She thought about how strange life could be, how something that seemed lost could return, not as it once was, but in a way that healed more than one heart. Benny had found her when she was lonely, and now, in his new life, he had found someone else who needed him too. It wasn't the ending she had imagined, but it was the kind that made sense in a quiet, beautiful way. In the days that followed, Lily began visiting Benny and the old man, whose name was Mr. Harris. His house was only a few blocks away, a cozy place that smelled faintly of pine and old books. Benny greeted her each time with the same wild joy, running circles around the living room, tail wagging hard enough to knock over anything near him. Mr. Harris would laugh, offering Lily hot chocolate and stories about his late wife, who had always wanted a dog but never had the chance. Lily listened, realizing that her kindness had created something larger than she could have understood, a bridge between her small world and someone else's loneliness. Through the weeks of winter, the visits became a quiet ritual. Benny was no longer hers, but somehow that didn't matter anymore. He still rested his head on her lap when she sat on the floor, still looked at her with the same trust as before. Love, she was learning, wasn't always about keeping something. Sometimes it was about giving it the chance to be where it was meant to be. Spring came early that year. The snow melted, revealing the green underneath, and the air began to smell of rain and new beginnings. Lily's parents noticed the change in her. She smiled more. She laughed easily. Her teachers said she was doing well, and her father started coming home earlier just to ask about her day. Life felt lighter, simpler, as if the world had shifted in small but important ways. One afternoon, Lily and Mr. Harris took Benny to the park. The grass was wet, the air filled with the sound of children playing and birds darting through trees. Benny ran ahead, chasing after a stick, his fur glowing under the sun. Mr. Harris sat on a bench, and Lily sat beside him, the warmth of the day settling between them. There was a silence that didn't need filling, a peace that felt earned. She watched Benny bounding through the grass, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she had lost him. She had found something deeper instead. As they left the park, Benny ran back to her, pressing his head against her hand one last time before jumping into Mr. Harris's car. She watched them drive away, the wind carrying the sound of his bark faintly through the air. She didn't cry. Instead, she smiled, the kind of smile that comes from knowing something good has touched you and will never quite leave. That night, as the house settled into quiet, Lily sat by her window again. The same spot where months ago she had cried for a lost puppy. The moonlight spread across her room, gentle and calm. She thought about how one small act, stopping for a cry behind a garbage bin, had changed not just her life, but someone else's. Love had a strange way of echoing like that, bouncing between hearts, finding new homes when it needed to. And as she closed her eyes, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. The sense that everything was exactly as it should be. Because sometimes, the things that melt our hearts aren't meant to stay forever. They come to remind us of the warmth we're capable of giving. And they leave just enough of it behind to keep us brave for whatever comes next.